GoForThe2.com. These are my Week 14 predictions. Before I get into them, though, the Thursday night game, Louisville and Rutgers, the winner of that bowl game will move on to the Orange Bowl to face the ACC champion between Florida State and Georgia Tech. I'll have a written prediction for that game Thursday morning up on the website under GoForThe2.com under the NCAA pick section, so check that out. Friday night's games, there's two championship games. The MAC championship game between Northern Illinois and Kent State. I'll have a written prediction and breakdown for that game Friday, and the Pac-12 championship game between UCLA and Stanford, a rematch of last week's game. That'll be up on the website Friday morning under the NCAA pick section, so check that out both Thursday and Friday for those ball games as well. Let's talk about this weekend's picks. I talked about the podcast, the SEC Championship. I'm calling for a Bulldog victory over Alabama. I think the Bulldogs pick up a 24-20 victory over Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide. I think it'll be a very tight ball game. I think the game's going to come down to turnovers and whichever team can run the ball more effectively. I expect Todd Gurley, the running back sensation, freshman sensation for the Bulldogs, to step up and make some plays, and I think the Georgia defense will get some turnovers against A.J. McCarron. A.J. McCarron without Kenny Bell in this ball game. I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on the Alabama offense. I think the Georgia defense creates some turnovers, and I think that they pick up a 24-20 victory over Alabama and move on to face Notre Dame in the BCS National Championship game January 7th. But bottom line is, it's two great teams. They're both 11-1. It's must-watch TV, and the game will come down to turnovers and which team can run the ball more effectively. If Alabama does the win and McCarron does perform, you really, and the fans really need to step up and make a statement. He deserves to be mentioned in the Heisman Trophy race with Colin Klein, Manny Te'o, and Johnny Manziel at this point. He's 23-2 as a starter heading into this ball game. I like Georgia in this ball game, but should McCarron perform well and step up and get the victory, you have to consider A.J. McCarron for the Heisman. So let's get right into pick number 2. It's a Big Ten championship game between Nebraska and Wisconsin. The winner of this ball game will move on to the Rose Bowl to face the Pac-12 champion, UCLA or Stanford, whoever wins that ball game. This game's played in Indianapolis. It seems simple on paper. Nebraska's just going to run away with it, but I'm not sold on Taylor Martinez in big games. He has a tendency to turn the ball over in big games. When you look at the Cornhuskers' 2 losses on the season, on the road, the loss against UCLA, and on the road, the loss against Nebraska, Taylor Martinez made some poor decisions and he turned the ball over, and that's why Nebraska lost those ball games, or at least aided in the Nebraska loss. I'm not sold on Taylor Martinez making decisions in big games. He hasn't done it to this point. This is a big ball game. It's a conference championship. I like Wisconsin's defense. I think they force their style of play. Look for an ugly game. I think Monty Ball will be able to get some yards. You remember that both of these teams played earlier in the season. Wisconsin jumped out to an early lead in Lincoln. That's with Joel Stavia at quarterback. And Nebraska caught them. They picked up a victory by 7 points, but Wisconsin played very well in that ball game. I like Brett Bielema as a coach. I think he'll have his team ready, and I just like the running game of Wisconsin going up against Nebraska's defense in this ball game, coupled with the fact of Taylor Martinez on the road or on a neutral site and in big games. I think the Badgers pick up a 28-21 victory and move on to the Rose Bowl. Let's talk about the ACC Championship a little bit. Florida State coming off a loss to their arch rival Florida. E.J. Manuel was hurt in that ball game. He's cleared to play. They're facing Georgia Tech, who got blown out by Georgia, their arch rival, last week. But Georgia Tech backed into this ball game because the University of Miami self-imposed sanctions on themselves, disallowing them to play in postseason play. So I expect a very upbeat, emotional effort out of the Yellow Jackets. Couple that with the fact that they are a triple option team, always difficult to defend. I just think Florida State comes into this game lackluster. not having a lot to play for. I think that if they would have beaten Florida, I think Florida State would have blown out Georgia Tech. I think they win this ball game, but I think it's a lot closer than people think. I think Florida State picks up a 28-24 victory over Paul Johnson and the Yellow Jackets, but the Yellow Jackets will be able to run the football and score some points. I think they'll be in it from start to finish, but I think in the end, Florida State picks up the victory 28-24. Let's talk about Oklahoma on the road against TCU. TCU coming off the win against Texas on Thanksgiving night. Gary Patterson with a very emotional victory. They didn't beat Texas since 1967 in Austin. They got the victory last week, 20-13 over Mac Brown and his lackluster Texas Longhorns. They forgot how to tackle. They forgot how to keep the ball security last week, and TCU got the victory. They now come back home. They face a high-octane offense in the Oklahoma Sooners. Oklahoma coming off a 51-48 victory in overtime over the Oklahoma State Cowboys. I like Landry Jones, the way he performed in that ball game. I just like the offense of Oklahoma. They seem to be hitting on all cylinders. They turned the ball over at home last week in the red zone, and they still managed 51 points. They now go on the road with a chance to claim a share of the Big 12 championship should Kansas State lose to Texas. I like Oklahoma in this spot. I think they pick up a 45-28 victory on the road against TCU. Let's talk about Kansas State and Texas right now. Kansas State coming off a very emotional loss to Baylor. They had a week to think about it. Now Texas comes to town. They're starting Colt McCoy's younger brother, Casey McCoy. He gets the start for David Ash. Texas last week, they turned the ball over. David Ash did not perform very well, and the defense made some poor tackling. They allowed Trev Boykin to move the ball, and they gave up a ton of rushing yards. They're going to be going up against Colin Klein in that heavy offensive line. I like Kansas State in this ball game, but I think it's a lot closer than people think. I think Kansas State will win, but I like Texas to keep it close. I think Kansas State wins a 35-31 victory on the road in Manhattan. I just think Texas plays inspired coming off that loss to TCU, but in essence, Kansas State's the better team. I think Kansas State picks up a 35-31 victory at home over Texas. Let's talk about two Big East teams. Let's talk about Cincinnati and UConn. UConn came off a very impressive victory in overtime last week against Louisville. They shut down Teddy Bridgewater and that high-octane offense passing-wise. They have two very good cornerbacks that can play bump-and-run coverage. I like the way they are able to play defense and physical style of defense. Cincinnati comes to town. They knocked off South Florida at home. Now they travel on the road. I like UConn in this spot. I think they pick up a 24-21 victory at home over Cincinnati. When you looked at UConn, they struggled to run the ball on the road. That's why I like Louisville last week. They were only averaging 67 yards on the road. They're much better rushing the football at home. I like Lyle McCombs to get some yards. I like the way that defense stepped up and played. Look for an emotional effort out of the UConn Huskies this week, and I think they get a 24-21 victory over Cincinnati. One more Big East team. Pittsburgh traveling to South Florida to take on the Bulls. Pittsburgh coming off a very emotional win over Rutgers last week. Tino Sinceri, Ray Graham, Russell Shell, they stepped up. They dominated over the Scarlet Knights. Now they travel on the road. They're sitting at 5-6 with a chance to get their 6th win and become bowl eligible. I like Pittsburgh in this ball game, especially when you look at the job that Skip Holtz has done. He lost B.J. Daniels in the game against UConn. They've struggled ever since, struggling against Miami, struggling against Cincinnati. Now they come back home. In my estimation, they just want to throw in the towel. I think Skip Holtz is the next coach to get canned. When you look at what he's done in South Florida, he ruined everything Jim Leavitt built in that university. Back in 07, South Florida was sitting at number 2 in the country when they played Rutgers, when they had their quarterback, Matt Grothe. They lost that ball game, but they were number 2 in the country. That was under Jim Leavitt. Since Skip Holtz has been there, they've had 2 subpar seasons. They're sitting at 3-8. I think they go to 3-9. South Florida shows at this point they don't even want to play for their head coach. They want to get their offseason started. I like Pittsburgh in this ball game. I like what Paul Chryst has done. The team bonded after that Youngstown State loss early in the season. They've been up and down, but it's a new offensive system. He has a very good offensive line that can run the football. I like Pittsburgh in this ball game, 35-10 over South Florida. So there's the picks for the weekend. I hope you watch them. It's great matchups all week. If you're a college football fan, it doesn't get better than this. We have number 2 and number 3 facing off in the SEC Championship with the winner going on to the BCS National Championship game. That's the game to watch. It's on CBS. It's on 4 o'clock. I'll recap all the action next week, so stay with us at GoForThe2.com.